getting ready to do my chicken quilt, and I pieced this backing, so it's all over the place. It's got vertical and horizontal seams. I just tried to use some fabric I had, trying to get rid of some of it. Now, the reason some long armers don't like your seams vertical is because this is going to be tighter than the rest of it, and the sides will have a tendency to bag. And if I kind of even this up, you would see that. But I'm just going to release it a little bit right here and then pull it a little bit tighter on the sides, and it'll be fine. And if you look at the bottom compared to the leader, because I just throw my backing over and then I'll staple it to the leader back here. And it's not exactly straight, even though I tried to straighten this quilt or this backing as best I could. Obviously not too good right here. Last night, my stapler decided to not work, and I was in the middle of putting this on. My husband took it apart 3 or 4 times, trying to figure out what it was. And it was one of the connectors inside was corroded, and one of the batteries was corroded. So he got it working, thank God. I didn't have to buy a new stapler. So anyway, I'll show you the progress on this quilt as we go along. Thanks. Here's the backing all attached to the leaders. Excuse me. And you can see it looks pretty good. It's still pretty tight right through here. But I don't have any bagging here. We'll see how it works out as I'm quilting. So I'm just going to bring it kind of close to the bottom here so that I can attach the top of the quilt. It's easier to do it that way. And then I'll start quilting. Let's have a little chat while I'm doing my quilt here. So I'm just trying to finish my little chicken quilt, and I have to put some trims in it and finish doing the rows. And so I just thought maybe I would chat a little bit about long arm quilting while I do this. I have this little holder on top of my long arm so I can put my phone. It makes it easy if I want to look at a video or I want to record something. So I saw this quilt that was quilted, and the quilter did not quilt all the way to the edge of the sides on the quilt. And it was like one row was quilted all the way to the side, and then maybe she offset the rows, and so there was this little gap, you know, on the edge, and about like this. It's a big gap, not a small gap. And then the other row was quilted in this gap, and then the other row is quilted. And I was like totally surprised somebody would quilt a quilt like that. And so I'm curious, does anybody else have that kind of stuff happen where the quilter doesn't quilt all the way? Maybe they leave a gap at the top. Sometimes your patterns for edge to edge are like this, you know? And when you set up your edge to edge, it always wants to put it on the top, and then here's your, you know, row going like this, so you got these little gaps, but you need to fill those in. You can't just leave them. I mean, that looks stupid if you leave them. So does anybody else get a quilt back that they leave those gaps in between their edge to edge? Or I'm just curious, because I don't think that's good quilting practice, but I mean, if you don't mind your quilt being like that, I guess that's okay. I don't know. I would not quilt it like that. I always make sure that they go over up to the edge, and if I have a weird pattern that doesn't allow me to bring it all the way to the edge, I'll I make sure I stretch it over the border, and then I have a function that's called fill inside, and I'll just fill inside, and it cuts it off where it needs to, and everything looks good. But leaving big gaps in the quilting would cause it to bunch up and wash it. I don't think it would look good. I'm trying to base down my quilt here, and some of my stitching has come off my own quilt. All right, I got it. If I quilt somebody's quilt and their seam is coming apart, I will sew it. I will sew it together because it happens to me. I do that. And it's not something that's you easily see, or you know it happened when you're, putting your quilt top together. And sometimes you just get in a hurry and you're sewing along, and it looks like from the front that it sewed it, but then you turn it over and it's just barely caught it or something, and the seam opens. One of the first quilts I did for a lady, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, and she had a seam that was open on my handy quilter, and I didn't have a spoon foot, which I have a spoon foot now. And my hopping foot caught that seam, and then it got all bunched up, and it almost tore the quilt, and it put my machine out of time, and I was just about to cry. It was a big mess. I always use a spoonful foot on edge-to-edge quilting because I will never have that happen again. So I made sure I bought a spoonful foot for my handy quilter after that happened. So I have my little chicken cut out, and I took this pattern. It was in edge-to-edge mode, and I'm just using relocate all to one point right now to move it, because I just feel like I have a little bit more control over what's happening. So this is a design that I digitized. And one of the things I forgot about when I digitize these designs is that, Gammill likes to have it closer, the ends and the starts closer to the bottom. Or it wants you to place 2 pins or do some other weird stuff. So that's why I decided to just select it all and relocate to one point, which works pretty fast. I mean, Gammill has a function right here called roll quilt. And so if you're in edge-to-edge mode and you roll your quilt up, you just place it at the last part that it stopped at. So my Gammill is coming up to the edge of my chicken and where the trim is, and so it's going to stop, and it's going to either want me to pull up the thread, which I'm going to try to do with one hand here, or you can, just go ahead and just let it move over and then trim the threads afterwards, which I actually did the first time, and I didn't like trimming all those threads, so we're just going to let it pull up and continue on. Then it's going to go to the next spot. Well, I couldn't do it with one hand, so I had to stop. And so now it's going to continue on with the pattern. And of course, I let my threads get ran over, so they're kind of caught in there. And it is kind of annoying because we have to keep stopping and pulling up the thread every time the pattern intersects my chicken. But after it's done, I'm going to do some free motion quilting around my chicken, around his wing, and probably around his eye. But I have to do that at the end when I get all my belts off. But I think it looks pretty good. I think the back looks really nice, and the pattern turned out pretty nice. I don't know where this thread's coming from. I'll cut that off. But I'll give you an update in a little bit.